All of this is happening while Dan was doing Bible drill. All the front row. I decided my presence was needed right there behind me.
I love it. My family
She'll look
and then
welcome back. Thank you. I like the top. Oh, yes. I'm gonna say. I'm gonna just say. I'm making sure that I'm gonna say for this side home, I'm gonna want to build still. Done any good reading lately? Okay, good. Have you done?
And I got my own for your stuff today.
Oh, so much. Did you start for your critique?
I did.
What do you think? Is it hard to follow?
The first few wasn't fun. I think it's getting clearer as I go.
Yeah. He also, those were originally radio, and they are easier to understand, because he explains things, and when you're just basically reading a transcript of a radio program, it is kind of like harder to follow. So it's fair.
I can see where it's more understandable than maybe something else.
Yeah. He speaks very slowly. He has a very Centurion British accent, so he speaks very deliberately. He goes through the material. So it's like the radio program is so slow that you kind of understand the process as it goes through it. I've always wanted to do like a couple of sermons that basically take his book and then explain them in like 21st century American English. Because I think you're encountering the same problem a lot of people. Good luck, though. All right, good to see everybody. We're going to go ahead and get class started here. We don't want to get started too late. We're already a couple minutes past the hour. I'll start with this, and I want to be clear. Please don't give Jacob a round of applause. I don't want to embarrass him any more than I already am, but I did get Jacob a little gift for covering class twice for me. Twice. So I'll go ahead and I know how much you like the Florida State Seminoles. I almost got a Miami mug, but oh wow, thank you. Yeah, there you go. Thank you so much for covering class. He hates the Seminoles. Yeah. Look at the color of his tie. He's got orange and blue on his tie already. All right. Let's go ahead and start with a quick word of prayer. I'm going to go ahead and close the door also. Too many disruptive influences out in the hallway. All right, let's open with a quick word of prayer, and then we're going to be in Mark chapter 12, verse 18. Let's pray. Our Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this wonderful day. We thank you that we get to be together. It is an incredible blessing that we too often take for granted, that we get to be with our church family, to open up your word, to grow closer to each other, and to grow closer to you in this process of fellowship and worship. And we do pray that this is a really, really productive hour of Bible study. Thank you for these and so many other blessings. And we pray this in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so let's start here in Mark chapter 12, verse 18. And there were some Sadducees who say that there is no resurrection, and they came to him and began questioning him, saying, and we'll go ahead and get to what they're saying in just a moment. Let's be clear about who the Sadducees are. A lot of times we read about these Pharisees and Sadducees, and these are really the two main parties in the Sanhedrin Council, and they represented vastly different philosophical approaches to Scripture. So on the one end, you have the Pharisees, who I think we wrongly assume are maybe the ultra-conservatives of their time, but I don't really think that that's quite the right description for the Pharisees. In some ways, the Pharisees were actually the liberals of their time, and even that term is not quite right. But let me explain. The Sadducees represented the majority in the Sanhedrin Council. And I think we forget that, okay? The Sadducees were actually the majority in the Sanhedrin Council. The Sadducees also held a lot of the political power. The Sadducees were closer with the priesthood, and the priesthood, of course, were collaborators with the Romans, and it was essentially a political arm there in Jerusalem. And so the Sadducees were really the more powerful and the majority in the Sanhedrin Council. Their philosophical approach to the Scriptures were they believed only in the Torah. Okay, and which books of the Bible are the Torah? The first five. That's right. The first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy. And so the Sadducees only accepted the Torah as authoritative Scripture. Now, it's not like they just rejected wholesale the rest of the Hebrew Bible, but as far as what was authoritative and divinely inspired teaching, it is Torah only, okay? The Pharisees, on the other hand, not only accepted the Torah, but they accepted everything else in the Hebrew Bible, the prophets, the poetry, the Psalms, Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, Ruth and Esther, right? They accepted all of it. But in addition to all of the Hebrew Bible, what else did the Pharisees accept? What else was part of the Pharisees' collection of authoritative material? Yeah, the tradition, right? The accepted traditions of their forefathers. And they believed, the Pharisees believed that they could trace oral tradition that they held at that moment all the way back to Moses. As in, they actually believed that Moses not only received the written law, so God told him the written law, the 10 Commandments and everything on the tablets, but God also told him separately an oral law. So God said, here's the 10 Commandments, here's all the stuff I want you to write down. Now, in addition to that, here's some stuff I don't need you to write, but I want you to tell everybody, okay? And they'll tell others, and they'll pass it on and pass it on and pass it on. So the Pharisees regarded the received oral traditions as not just like made up and useful, but they believed it traced its origin all the way back to Moses. So that explains why the Pharisees have so many of these kind of weird traditions and why they were so important to them. So in a way, the Sadducees were actually the more conservative because they reduced the amount of material and limited authority to a very, very specific and small set of just the Torah, just the first 5 books of the Bible.
And that also helps understanding why they don't believe in the resurrection.
Yeah.
Because it's their assumption that there's very little said about the resurrection in the Torah, which makes it really cool how Jesus ends up handling this.
Exactly. That's the point he's going to get at here in just a minute. And Jacob's right. Like let's say if you tied one hand behind your back when it comes to the Bible, and I said, you are only allowed to use Genesis through Deuteronomy. So tie your hand behind, not literally, but you know what I mean. Tie your hand behind your back and prove to me from only Genesis to Deuteronomy, prove to me angels, demons, a resurrection, an afterlife, an eternal spirit and soul. From just those 5 books, prove to me all of those things. And we kind of struggle with that. Like, no, I think that there are things in Genesis that you could maybe pull out about angels, but the Sadducees would say, no, that's a mistranslation. The word angel in Hebrew just means messenger. That's all it means. So whenever you see angels in Genesis, like Genesis 18, so it's just messengers. That's all. That's all. No angels, no demons. What about soul? Nope, breath. That's it. It's ruach in Hebrew. It just means breath. God didn't give us eternal souls. He just gave us breath. So you kind of understand why there's all this religious division over it, because if you have to tie your hand behind your back and you're trying to defend, again, heaven, hell, a resurrection, an eternal soul, a living spirit, angels, demons, and you only have the first 5 books of the Bible as your material that the Sadducees will accept, well, then you understand why. Nope, I don't believe in any of that stuff. That is why they don't accept any of that stuff, because their scope of what is authoritative material is very, very narrow, okay? Now, the Sadducees love to bring up ridiculous things like this little hypothetical story they come up with, because to them, it's the ultimate gotcha question. What is a gotcha question? What does that term mean?
To trap somebody into whatever it is that your preconceived notion is.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a question that is meant to trap you into my preconceived notion about you. All right. And if I was to present it in just a purely binary way, like if I asked Andy, we all know the silly hypothetical, Andy, how long has it been since you quit abusing your wife? How do you answer that? Right? You do not. Yeah, that's right. And he says, according to human resources, you do not answer that question without representation in the room. So, but that is a gotcha question. A gotcha question is, no matter how you answer it, I've got you. I can use your answer, whether it's a yes or a no. I've got you, and I can use your answer against you. So they sit there proudly like, we have formulated the ultimate gotcha question as far as the resurrection goes, because they don't believe in the resurrection. Okay, they don't believe in the resurrection. Now the Pharisees, do the Pharisees believe in angels, demons, the soul, resurrection, heaven, hell? Yes, they believe in all of those things. They accept all of those things. Why? Because they look at Malachi and the book of Psalms and Proverbs and 2 Samuel 7 and all these passages on any number of topics. So the Sadducees, here's their ultimate gotcha question, okay? Teacher, they say in verse 19, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies and leaves behind a wife and leaves no child, his brother should take his wife and raise up offspring to his brother. Now, what is that? There's a term for that. That's called the Levirate law. Levirate, the Levirate law. Levirate marriage, okay? It is the idea, and it comes from Deuteronomy 25, verses 5 through 10. If you're making notes, I'm going to put that up here. Okay? That's right. All right. Levirate law from Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. Okay? We should probably read that just so we're all on the same page about it. I mean, if they're going to quote it, we better read it here. When, he says in Deuteronomy 25, verse 5, when brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. It shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, that his name may not be blotted out from Israel. But if the man does not desire to take his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate to the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He's not willing to perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. then the elders of his city shall summon him and speak to him, and if he persists and says, I do not desire to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the sight of the elders, and pull his sandal off his foot, spit in his face, and she shall declare, thus it is done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And in Israel his name shall be called the house of him whose sandal is removed. Okay, a little bit weird. I get it. What is the principle behind this, though? Why does this law exist? What is the underlying moral principle behind the Levirate law?
Family line.
Family line. Family line is extremely important because property ownership is associated with family line. Posterity is associated with family line. And it's, I mean, like, even in the 21st century, there is a sense that people feel of, I want to see my children grow up. I want to see my grandchildren. I mean, hey, I'd love to live old enough to see my great-grandchildren. Like, there is a sense of pride and completion and lineage and posterity and maybe even in some itty-bitty sense a feeling of, you know, I live on through my kids and my grandkids. Now, we don't literally live on through our kids and our grandkids, but this is not a concept that is totally dead in our culture, but it was very much an important concept in their culture, especially with regard to property ownership, right? There's a reason why God, during the time of Joshua and the conquest, there is a reason why God said, this is your land over here, this is your land over here, this is your land over here, and every 49 years, on the 50th year, when the year of Jubilee happens, all land returns to its previous family ownership. There's a every 50 years reset, so that even if you have to sell your land for whatever reason, it comes back to your family during the year of Jubilee. That is very important. It is a central concept in Israelite life. Okay, so that's the point behind it. Is if you die and you have no kids, it is a brother's responsibility to make sure that your family lineage doesn't just end then and there. Now, are there some qualifiers to all of this? What is one thing that I think we forget about with the Levirate law? We're like, well, wait a minute, what if I'm already married or whatever it is? What is a qualifier? Look again at verse 5 of Deuteronomy 25. What is a qualifier that's a really important qualifier there? That's first. If he has no children himself, and then what's that? A son. And you're all right, but there's one that maybe is a little subtle there. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah,
either with his brother or with his parents.
Exactly. Yeah, we are not talking about a situation where you've got two men who are adults who are both married. What's implied? If Rebecca and I are married and my younger brother lives with us, what's kind of implied in that situation? If Rebecca and I have a house and my younger brother lives with us, what do you assume about that younger brother? That he's a single man. Yeah, that he's not married, he's single. Okay? So, even built within the Levirate law, there are some kind of qualifiers attached to it. And at the end of the day, does the guy get stoned if he just really, really doesn't want to marry his sister-in-law? Is it punishable by death? What's the punishment for not wanting to marry your sister-in-law? If you get slapped with a sandal and they just say, shame on you for that. Shame on you. Yeah, spit in your face, shame on you. And so, now I get it. That is a big burden, okay? That's an emotional burden. There may be even a social burden with that of being, well, he's the guy who just let his brother's line just disappear. But at the end of the day, is this done like, if you don't do this, you'll be stoned in the streets? I mean, yeah, you'll get shamed for it, but you don't have to marry your sister-in-law, okay? You don't have to. You have a choice. The choice may come with a social and emotional consequence to it, but you have a choice. All right, so that's the Levirate law. Okay, that's the Levirate law in short. Now let's go back to Mark chapter 12. Now let's just say, and that's how I imagine the Sadducees are saying, let's just say There were 7 brothers in verse 20, and the first took a wife and died, leaving no offspring, and the second one took her and died, leaving behind no offspring, and the third likewise. And so all 7 left no offspring. Last of all, the woman died also. In the resurrection, which they don't believe in, when they rise again, which one's wife will she be? For all 7 had her as a wife. Okay, it's the ultimate gotcha question, isn't it? Now, here's the thing about gotcha questions that I don't play the game. Like whenever I sit down with a Bible skeptic, it's like, oh, all right, preacher man, I got some stumpers for you here. I got some stump the preacher questions. I always try to look for the loose thread, because the problem is when you specifically engineer a question as a gotcha question, there is always a loose thread, like a sweater, that you can pull and the whole thing falls apart. So let's dismantle this, right? Just immediately, even before we get to Jesus' answer, which is brilliant, by the way, even before we get to that, what are some kind of holes in this? Like, if you heard that scenario, what would your response be to that scenario?
If I had
Go ahead, Jay.
I would say my first question would be, if I have a good answer, will you now believe in the resurrection?
Yes, that's good. I like that. Yes, and I do tell that to people. When people come up with stump the preacher stuff, I tell them ahead of time, I'll answer your question. I'll entertain this Bible discrepancy, this historical discrepancy, this whatever. I will entertain it, and we'll go through it. And I am happy to study with you. I want your questions answered. But if I answer all your questions, does that mean that you're willing to confess that Jesus is Christ, the Son of the living God? They usually aren't. But that's one way to answer it. Yeah, Stacey.
Oh, I was just going to say, the chances of her being married 7 times and not having any kids, kind of like, and then what? And then what? And then what if? And what if this? And what if that? And what if that happens? And what if that? It's just, ridiculous at some point.
It begins, that gotcha questions begin to strain at reality, right? Like they kind of push reality. And it's the whole thing of like, so you say baptism is necessary for the remission of sins. Well, yeah, Acts 2:38 says it's necessary for the remission of sins. Yeah. Well, what if a guy is on his way to get baptized, and as he's walking to the church building, an icicle falls and skewers his head and he dies before he gets baptized? I'm just like, when has that ever happened? Just tell me. Pull up the news story. Google it. When has it ever happened that a guy was on his way to get baptized and he got skewered in the head with an icicle? So it's like it strains at believability, because again, you are engineering a hypothetical situation. You are purposefully creating a hypothetical situation that has a desired outcome, and oftentimes those engineered situations that just don't happen in real life.
Show me 7 brothers that live together.
Yes, show me, exactly. Go to Deuteronomy. Yes, if brothers live together, that is the qualifier. Wait a minute, you're going like 7 brides for 7 brothers, though, right? Bless her beautiful eyes. If anybody gets that, good for you. You had a good upbringing. Your parents raised you well. But that, exactly, yes. Show me 7 brothers who all lived together, who were all single, who all had no children. Like, show me that. And all just died, one right after the other. Okay? It's just like, what's that? Yeah. Nobody suspects the Black Widow wife, right? So, even just baked into the scenario, this is clearly not a scenario that is going to actually happen in real life. But does Jesus take the low-hanging fruit? No. He actually engages them and finds not only the answer that dismantles their argument, but it's a 2-for-1 deal also. He's like, okay, I'm going to give you more than you bargained for. You came up with this hypothetical scenario. I am not only going to answer that question, but I'm also going to give you a freebie. You get an extra question while you're at it. You get an extra answer while you're at it. So let's look at his answer in verse 24. Is this not the reason that you are mistaken, that you do not understand the scriptures or the power of God? Ooh, well, okay. And that's really what it boils down to is, is a lot of times the Richard Dawkinses of the world, atheist debaters and stuff, you may be like a microbiologist or whatever, or, an ethicist for a living or something like that, but that doesn't mean that you're an expert in the Bible, okay? And Googling Bible discrepancies and then printing off a page full of Bible discrepancies and throwing it at a preacher, that does not mean that you actually understand the Bible. Now, good Bible students engage, okay? We will engage with those questions. You have to. But you've got to be a good Bible student. You've got to be a good enough Bible student to dismantle these arguments and say, all right, I'll hear you out on that. Okay, that's an interesting argument, but the context of that verse is this. This verse answers that part of that. I think you've misunderstood that verse, right? You've got to be able to nimbly and intelligently handle the scriptures that people are claiming are discrepancies or are contradictory. And so Jesus puts it very bluntly. Isn't this the reason that you're mistaken about this? Because you just don't really understand the scriptures. You don't understand it. So let me tell you what the problem is. When they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Oh boy, he's just like, think about this. Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection. Sadducees do not believe in heaven and hell. Sadducees do not believe in angels. And in one verse, in one sentence, he just said, angels, resurrection, heaven, boom, all in one verse. Like he went through 3 out of like the top 5 Sadducee like doctrines and just obliterated them in one fell swoop. So in the resurrection, so what do you think he means? Like just practical terms, like in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but they're like angels in heaven. Like, okay, what does that mean? Because I really like Rebecca. I mean, she generally likes me. So does that mean, and I think it makes married couples who have enjoyed a happy marriage, and I certainly hope that that's you, but married couples who've enjoyed a happy marriage sometimes think about this concept and they're like, well, isn't that going to be a little bit sad that I'm not like married in heaven? So how might you answer that? Like, what would be your approach to that is like a satisfactory sort of answer?
We're not going to be earthly.
Yeah, we're not going to be earthly. So,
And our focus will be on God.
Okay, so the focus is going to be on God, and I am going to be so overjoyed at the presence and the glory of an eternal relationship with my Creator that I'm not going to look over at Rebecca and go, oh. No, I'm going to look over at Rebecca as an eternal, glorified soul, and I'm going to see her enjoying an eternal face-to-face relationship with her Creator, and I'm going to go, this is great. I'm so happy that you're here with me, enjoying the same thing as me. We're going to be overjoyed for each other that we get to be in the presence of our Creator and to have this like amazing, glorified existence. Whatever that existence is like, I'm going to be happy that she is there on her own terms, as her own soul, having that joy. So that's one way to look at it. Stacy? Do you like the no-look path?
Yeah, I can say that. I was gonna say, the love that I have, or we have, Brent and I have for each other, is so deep in my mind. Like, he knows everything, he can finish my sentence, vice versa. But if we can love like that, will we not, when we get to heaven, love all of our brethren like that?
Yeah.
I feel like that what does it say about the power of God? You're not understanding the power of God.
Yeah.
The whole reason why we're called to love here is because we're going to love there. Like, I'm going to love him the way that I love him, and the way that I love her and him, and vice versa. It's kind of like when I had Sierra, I thought, oh, I can never love another child the way I love Sierra.
Yeah.
She's my first, my everything, my whatever. And I didn't think that I could love a second child the way that I loved her, because she was my only child. Then when the new child came, it's like, what? There's more room.
There's more room for it.
There's more room. Like, I loved them both equally, you know? And so I think it's the same thing when we go to heaven. We're not going to be thinking about, well, I deeper than love that we
Yeah.
have, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, whatever relationship will continue to exist between a husband and a wife, that relationship is actually going to be an even deeper relationship. And it will be a relationship couched in our glory and our adoration and the presence of God. And so the idea that like, oh, so we're not going to be married in the afterlife. No, listen. Imagine marriage at its absolute best in this world. And then imagine that you multiply that by 1 billion, and it's even better. And then it's like, oh, well, so I'm not. Listen, when you go to heaven, you're not losing anything of the love between a husband and a wife. You're not losing anything. You are actually gaining an even deeper relationship with that soul, and millions upon millions and millions of other souls as well. And that is such a non-earthly concept that like it boggles the mind, and that's okay. Heaven is meant to boggle the mind. Like we're just meant to have only these touch points here on earth, these kind of moments of we get a foretaste of the flavor of heaven, just these very, very brief touch points here on earth. And so yeah. So he answers that question already. It's like you're wrong. Like the idea of like, well, in the resurrection, whose husband will she be or whose wife will she be? Like that's a moot point. He takes the question and says it is a moot point. It doesn't matter. They're not going to be husband or wife at all. They're going to be like angels in heaven. But I answer that one. Let me give you a freebie now. Because with Jesus, you always get more than you bargained for. When you come up and try to tussle with Jesus and the scriptures, he's not just going to tear apart the argument you threw out there. He's going to go, while I'm at it, while I've got you here, let me add this one as well. But, verse 26, regarding the fact, not the theory, not the hypothesis, not the kind of nebulous concept, but regarding the fact that the dead rise again, have you not read in the book of Moses, in the passage about the burning bush, how God spoke to him saying, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. That's Exodus chapter 3. So this is what Jacob alluded to earlier in the class, is that this is what makes this argument so strong, is that Jesus is going on, okay, all right, fine. I'll play along. Tie my hand behind my back. Give me Genesis through Deuteronomy, and let's argue about the resurrection. That's fine. I'll tie my hand behind my back, and I'll play your game. Haven't you even read from Exodus, which is the Torah? Haven't you even read from Exodus in Exodus 3? I am the God of your fathers. I am the God of Abraham. I am the God of Jacob, or of Isaac. I am the God of Jacob. What does Jesus pull from that passage in verse 27? He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. You are greatly mistaken. So what is he pulling from Exodus 3 then? What concept is he pulling out there from the language?
Resurrection.
Yeah, the resurrection. And in what way? What is the...
The spirit doesn't.
Yeah, present tense. What's that, Jason?
The spirit doesn't die, the body does.
Yeah. And so the fact that he says it in the present tense, I am currently, right now, right here, I am the God of Abraham. Well, wait, didn't Abraham die several hundred years ago? Yes, he did. So what does it mean if God is still presently the God of a man who's been dead? From our perspective now, for thousands of years, if God is still presently the God of Abraham, what does that mean about Abraham? And it's what Jeff said. It means that Abraham is still alive. Now, not in a physical sense. I mean, even Peter talks about David in his sermon in Acts chapter 2. When Peter references the scripture that David wrote from the Psalms, he says, now we know most assuredly that David is dead and his bones are buried out in the graves of the kings, or the tombs of the kings. So do we acknowledge that David is dead and that Abraham is dead and that Joshua is dead? And do we acknowledge that? Yeah. But the fact that God is, I am the God of Abraham, a guy who's been dead for 4,000 years. I am the God of Isaac, and I am the God of Jacob. It means that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and David, and Solomon, and Job, they are alive, and they continue to exist in some way, a spiritual way, after the physical body is gone. And he just ends it by saying, you're greatly mistaken. Like, your whole perspective is off. God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. You are wrong. I love it. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, it's just striking because not only is it a complete argument that tears apart the stupidity of the premise, because it's a stupid premise. It tears apart the stupidity of the premise, but it also answers two deeply fundamental dogmas of the Sadducees. The concept of the resurrection and the eternal soul. And he's just like, tears them apart in one fell swoop. It's a brilliant, brilliant argument.
And Ryan, here's what's
Yeah,
funny.
right.
Before he checks them, he tells them, you don't know the scriptures, so I'm about to show you. Oh, and by that in the scriptures, you're also going to realize the power of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so what he really breaks down is, in the scriptures, talk about the power of God, and you didn't even recognize it in the first place, so now I'm about to explain it to you.
Yeah.
And they get stuck, because there's nothing they can say, right? You just got to explain them in a way that had them completely messed up.
Yeah, I've just always been flummoxed by the Sadducees. Like they're perplexing, aren't they? They were diligent law keepers. They kept the law better than the Pharisees did. The Pharisees kept man-made traditions and never touched the law. The Sadducees were deeply committed to keeping the law. But you always look at it like, why? Why do you keep the law? If there is no eternal soul, to me it gets to like a fundamental question that Mere Christianity is asking by C.S. Lewis, that Kathy's been reading right now. It's the fundamental question is like, well then, why be a moral being? Like, well, what's the point? Like, what is the point of basic morality if there is no eternal soul? And it's a deeply philosophical question that I don't think unbelievers or pure, naturalists or whatever, I don't think you have a good answer for it. So the Sadducees they're very perplexing to me. I think it's an odd. Now, maybe in fairness to them, they were rich and they were politically powerful, and so for them, there's no incentive. Heaven has no incentive. When you're rich and powerful in this world, is there much drive to think about heaven? Not really. So maybe that contributes to it. Stacy, and then let's move on to the next story here.
Okay, this is my last statement.
Okay.
I'm not gonna talk the rest
It's
of
on
it.
record. No, you don't have to do that.
I am not gonna talk. But anyway, I wanted to say how beautiful 27 is because he says that we live.
Mm-hmm.
They live. Because they live, we're gonna live. Because God sent his son and died for us, we too will get to live. And I just think, like, I don't want to say, but people will say, well, you just go to sleep. You just go to sleep. No, you don't. You live. And I think that's the important thing. Otherwise, why are we here?
Yeah.
Why are we here? If God told me, look, you're just going to sleep. You're going to die, life's going to die, but you'll just be asleep. You won't know anything. Why am I here? The purpose of us to be here is because we know the great promise is we are going to live and get to be with him and not be separated from him. And what a beautiful gift that is.
God is fundamentally a God of life. That's who he is. That's one of his great defining theological characteristics is he is a God of life. He's a life giver, a life preserver. And yes, that's a good point. I half expected Brent to say, come forward as we stand and say, because he lives.
Good for you, Ryan.
I could see it in your eyes. Okay, let's pick up here in verse 28. Now, one of the scribes came and heard them arguing, and recognizing that he'd answered them well, and I like this, the scribes and the Pharisees were very closely linked, and so it's possible that this scribe was also a Pharisee. So it's like, you have this kind of Pharisee scribe kind of eavesdropping, and he's like, oh, I think I kind of like this Jesus guy. He's over here dealing with Sadducee arguments, ripping the Sadducees to shreds, and this scribe is like, I'll listen in on this. I mean, you can almost recognize like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, because the Pharisees and the Sadducees were just oil and water. So this scribe kind of chimes in. He's got his own gotcha question, but to his credit, I don't think that he asks it as a trick question. I think that this scribe has a question that he keeps in his back pocket as a test to see what you're really made of, as far as your spirit, your philosophy, your approach to the scriptures. And it's a question that and this is me speculating, I think that this scribe, this is his favorite question because it reveals who you are. When he comes up and says, hey, I just want to know what your answer is. Just tell me what you think. What do you think is the most important commandment of all? The answer to that question is like a window into the soul. And he's asked that question of everybody, of the Sadducees, of his fellow Pharisees, of the common man, up to the priests. He wants to know now, like, okay, Jesus, you answered a question really well, and I recognize that. But how do you handle this one? Which commandment is the greatest one of all? And he asks it sincerely, wanting to know the answer. Well, the foremost is this, from the book of Deuteronomy again, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And just like with the Sadducee, it's a 2-for-1 deal. You ask me one question, I'm going to give you a freebie. While I've got your attention, I'm going to give you a freebie. The second greatest commandment is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There's no other commandment greater than these. Okay? To me, that's, I mean, like, that's at the top. How do you top that? How do you top that? How can you say that there's another passage in the Bible that contains what Jesus himself says is the most important 2 things you need to keep in mind? There's nothing else that is more important. Now, in the discharge of this duty, by doing the first and second greatest commandments, what is going to happen incidentally? You're going to end up following all the other ones, okay? Because if you love God, first and foremost, you will keep all of the commandments, right? If you love me, John chapter 15, verse 14, John chapter 14, verse 15, you are my friends if you do what I say. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, right? And in doing the second commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself, what are you also going to do? That when issues come up of conflict, of property damage, of theft, of lies, dishonesty, infidelity, that by trying to keep the second commandment, you will inevitably and incidentally be keeping all the other commandments as well. That's why these are the most important. They're the most important. Because by doing these things, you'll do everything else. Now, it's like I mentioned in my lesson at 9 that Sterling is going through driving lessons right now. He's doing a great job. Like I'm not making a joke at all. He's doing a really good job. He's soaking it all in. He's learning. I'm clenching my teeth a little bit less every time we go out. But the expectation is like we have set, and when Rebecca and I talked to him about driving, we're like, there are a few things that are absolutely important, first and foremost, about driving. And I told him the number one most important thing, the most important consideration, the thing that comes before anything else is your safety and the safety of those around you. Everything else has to be attached to that. Right? If the safest thing to do is this path or that path or that path, you do the safest thing. Your number one goal is be safe. Or put another way, nobody dies. Okay? Nobody dies. And now, if that's your number one goal is nobody dies, everybody is safe, you will do all the other laws incidentally, or as a support of that most fundamental concept. Okay. Now let's say your number one, like you can twist it. Let's say your number one priority is to get from point A to point B as fast as possible. Okay. If that is your most important priority, are you going to end up violating a lot of the other laws? Yeah. And so I think that's why Jesus lays this out, is like, when you get first things first, everything else falls in line. Okay? Priority number one, and then I'll give you priority number two as well. Everything else will fall in line if you've got your priorities set in order. Now, the scribe in verse 32 said to him, "Right, teacher, you have truly stated that he is one and there is no one else besides him, and to love him with all the heart and all the understanding and with all the strength, to love one's neighbor as himself is much more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices." And Jesus, in verse 34, when he saw that he had answered intelligently, I like that. That's a great word, isn't it? That was an intelligent answer. You know what? Think about what he did. What was his answer? Verses 32 and 33. Fundamentally, what was his answer? He just repeated what Jesus said. You know the smartest thing you can say? Just repeat what Jesus said. That is the most intelligent answer you can give to anybody, is just say what Jesus said. If you can just say what Jesus said, you will answer intelligently. And I love that. I think that's such a great idea that when Jesus saw he answered intelligently, he wasn't trying to defend himself or throw in his own wisdom or his own 2 cents. Well, this is my interpretation, or I'm going to quibble with you a little on this point. But he just repeated what Jesus said. Great, do that. Like, to do that. If it's in the red letters in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, if it's red letters, just do that. Okay? And you will be really intelligent if you just say what Jesus says. That is the smartest answer you can give, is to just answer what Jesus says. When he told him, he answered him intelligently, he said, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And again, this is it's a compassionate response. It's a response that acknowledges you've still got a ways to go. You still have things to learn, but I recognize you're on the right path. You are on the right, you're asking the right questions and you are accepting the answers that you're given. I'll tell you what, if you can be that, like, you're on the right path. You're on the right path. And after that, no one would venture to ask him any more questions. At least for now, until verse 35. Verse 35, we'll go ahead and hold up. We're just about out of time. The bell's going to ring any second now. So let's go ahead and stop there. That's a good, clean place to stop. Good, clean break. We will start there in our next class, Mark 12, verse 35. Thank you so much, everybody, for your attention.
Oh, I'm leaving my Valentine's behind. Bless you. You might not have to.
Yeah, that's what it is. My closet has too much black.
Hey, how are you? Good.